I call the honourable member Grant Robertson.
Thank you very much, Mr Chair. It's a pleasure to rise and speak in the committee stage of Part 1 of the Local Electoral Amendment Bill. And as just picking up where my colleague Andrew Little left off, the Labour Party is pleased to be able to support a piece of legislation that within Part 1 has the goal of limiting the amount of or value of anonymous donations, refining the definition of anonymous and donation, enhancing the obligations of candidates for the disclosure, reporting and recording of electoral donations, and introducing penalties for non-compliance for those matters. This is the kind of transparency that has been missing from local electoral law. And sitting alongside that is the importance of making this consistent with the Electoral Act 1993. And I think that is welcomed by all members of the House, because there have been serious issues in this area that need to be addressed, and in fact the driving force behind some of the changes here are the issues that have arisen in this House and elsewhere around donations to local body election campaigns. And I think it's important, Mr Chair, to illustrate why the changes in Part 1 are important by aligning them with specific and real situations. And in that regard, Mr Speaker, I want to talk about the definition of anonymous and the definition of donation, because we've certainly seen in the past the grey area of this being exploited. And I think the obvious situation that we have to refer to here is Mr John Banks and his situation in the Auckland mayoral election campaign of 2010. And I want to specifically refer here to the question of the definition of anonymous and donation. I wonder if members of the House would consider the following type of donation to be one that could be regarded as anonymous. This is where an entity, in this case Sky City Limited, agree to make a donation to a mayoral campaign of John Banks. And I have in front of me here the formal written statements of a staff member of Sky City and of the Chief Executive of Sky City, Nigel Morrison. And he recalls attending a meeting with John Banks in his office, and this is what he said in his statement: "The meeting lasted only about 10 minutes, during which time I handed to John Banks the cheque in a Sky City envelope." That's what it says. That's what it says in the witness statement from Nigel Morrison, the Chief Executive of Sky City. He handed Mr Banks a cheque in a Sky City envelope. Mr Chair, John Banks declared that donation as anonymous. He said he didn't know who gave him a $15,000 cheque. A $15,000 cheque handed to him in a Sky City envelope. It'll be one of those white envelopes, DLE envelopes, Mr Chair, with the Sky City logo on the left-hand bottom corner. I'm sure that'll be the envelope that Mr Banks received the cheque in. Nigel Morrison said that in a sworn affidavit to the police. Another staff member from Sky City also indicated that his organisation had received a receipt from Team Banksy. A receipt from Team Banksy for the said $15,000 cheque. So let's just be absolutely clear here, Mr Chair. The situation we've got is that a $15,000 cheque is handed to Mr Banks in a Sky City envelope. His treasurer from Team Banksy receipts that, and Mr Banks declares it as anonymous. Mr Banks declares that donation as anonymous. That is the kind of cover-up, the kind of evasion of the law that we've come to expect from Mr Banks on this side of the House. And Mr Chair, that is why this law is needed. However, the problem we've got, Mr Chair, is that John Banks has not been fully held to account for that. John Banks has not been fully held to account because the police, while they were able to find him guilty of having breached the law in one particular part of his donation regimes, that's the fact that he signed a false return, the time period in which he was able to be convicted for that had expired. So while they said absolutely he broke the law in that regard, the time period for that conviction has expired. John Key, of course, said that he would sack John Banks if it had been discovered that he'd broken the law, but he, Mr Chair,
Grant Robertson.
but he backed off that very, very quickly once he realised that, refused to read the police report. But the other part of Mr Banks's donation, which is relevant to part one here, is that whether or not Mr Banks knowingly signed off on a false return. And the police in the end said that they were unable to come to a decision as to whether Mr Banks had knowingly done that. Now, if Mr Banks had knowingly done that, then he would be subject to a conviction with a prison term of up to 2 years. And I think people in the House know what that means. That would mean that Mr Banks could no longer serve as an MP. So it's certainly in the interest of the government not to see that go to its full fruition. But one of the reasons I suspect that the police were unable to decide that that donation that Mr Banks had knowingly signed a false return is because of what Mr Banks might have said to them when he was interviewed. Now, I am in receipt of the police file on Mr Banks's case under the Local Electoral Act, and all of the witness statements for that case have been provided to me, bar one. The one witness statement that's missing is John Banks's. And here's the police report about their interview with John Banks. Here it is. Yes, one of those. So, yes, very familiar, blacked out there and on the next page as well. So Mr Banks, who said he had nothing to fear, nothing to hide, has hidden this because he's very afraid of what it says. He's very afraid as to what it will show is that, of course, these donations were not anonymous. He knew the donations he was getting. I've only been able in this call so far to refer to the Sky City donation. The Kim.com donations, 2 of them, $25,000 each. Mr. .com has given extensive evidence in this inquiry to indicate that he was very well aware. He was giving those donations to Mr. Banks. Mr. Banks came in a helicopter to his mansion and indicated that he would be gratefully receiving of these $50,000. He specifically asked for the donation to be split into 2 $25,000 amounts. And he did that, Mr. Chair, because he had a number of other $25,000 donations. And so what he was doing, using the provisions of the Local Electoral Act as they were at that time, he said, if you give me this in a $25,000 lot, I can put it alongside all the other donations of $25,000 and magically claim that I don't know who they came from. And Mr. Chair, that's why these changes are required, is because people like John Banks are prepared to exploit any loophole in the law that they can find. They are prepared to do anything that is possible not to be upfront with New Zealanders. And it's very important to know that it is John Banks that is propping up this national government, a person who is thoroughly disgraced and discredited, a person who is now in court on these matters. And he is the person propping up this government. He is the person who has exploited this Electoral Act beyond what any reasonable person would believe that these clauses should allow. The idea that he could declare these donations as anonymous is not just ridiculous, I would allege that it is also corrupt. He has done this knowingly. And Mr. Banks, we can't see what he said to the police, but Mr. Banks has done this knowingly. He knew he did this. He used the Local Electoral Act in the form that it was in to ensure that New Zealanders couldn't see who'd donated to him. That's bad enough. But then he covered it up. And he has covered it up day after day. And today I stand here waiting for Mr. Banks to allow the release of his witness statement. Because if he said he had nothing to fear and nothing to hide, then he should release that witness statement. And I know why he doesn't want it released, Mr. Chair, is because it will show that he has lied to the Prime Minister. And the Prime Minister said if he found that out, John Banks was gone. But he knows, the Prime Minister knows, he can't do that because his government is propped up by disgraced MPs and MPs like John Banks who have knowingly breached the Local Electoral Act. Mr. Chair, we on the Labour Party side of the House do support this bill. We believe that it's high time that local electoral matters were made clearer, that they were made consistent with the Electoral Act. But, Mr Chair, while we support this bill, we cannot support the fact that the government continues to be propped up by somebody who used the loopholes in this Act, who deliberately misled New Zealanders and the New Zealand public about the donations that he received. That is unacceptable, and the changes in this Act are high time coming, so people like John Banks can't get away with it.
Mr Chair. I call the honourable member